Hi, this time I'm going to be talking about everything needed for 3D printing and model painting. I'm going to be running through everything I've recently bought and how much it costs. In my last video I realised that 3D printing was going to be the way forward, so I bought myself a Elegoo Mars Pro and a Mercury Plus for cleaning and curing. To start with, here I'm unboxing the Mercury Plus. The idea with this is once the 3D prints have come out the printer, they'll need to be washed and cured so that they harden properly. There's already videos out there which explain how to set up and use both the Mercury Plus and the Elegoo Mars for 3D printing, so I'm not going to go into details with how to make use of those, unless there's particular demand. So everything looked pretty much as it should with the Mercury Plus, however with the Mars Pro I wasn't so fortunate. After I started unboxing it, I realised that one of the legs had broken, presumably in transit. So here's the shattered remains of what's left of the leg of the Mars Pro. After a little bit of tweaking, I did manage to make it stand upright by adjusting the leg screw to make it a little bit longer. It was at this point that I contacted the retailer, a company called 3D Jake, to see if they'd be able to supply me with a replacement part, or alternatively a replacement printer. About 3 weeks later I received not one but 2 replacement legs in the post. Before buying, I had been doing a little bit of research, shopping around for different types of 3D printer. It seemed like the Mars Pro was a good entry-level resin printer which would allow me to get good results for model making and the type of figures that I kind of intended to print and then paint. And here I'm just giving a little overview of some of the bits that are included inside the Mars Pro box. Things like the gloves, the spatula, the cutters. It should all prove quite useful after the prints have come out the printer and I'm trying to prep them ready to be painted. The only thing that wasn't so useful was the European power lead. That's not going to fit properly in UK power sockets. Luckily I did have a spare kettle lead which I'll be using as a substitute. We're going to need some resin to actually turn into 3D prints. I bought a bottle of Elegoo's own resin which I hoped would give good prints given it's the same brand as the printer I'll be using. This one was a standard grey type of resin. I also bought a translucent resin which I thought would be quite fun to experiment with, especially if I go on to do things like put lighting inside of models to make them glow. I can kind of have the lights shining through the resin, or at least that's the hope in the long run. Even though the printer itself comes with some filter papers, I thought it might be a good idea to buy a separate filter in order to pour excess resin back into the resin tub so that I could reuse it later. And lastly, so far as the 3D printing goes, just some alcohol in order to clean excess resin off the prints after they come out the printer. So far as prepping the models go, I have various files. I have a set of sanding blocks at various grits. And I already had some additional sandpaper just lying around which I can use as well. I have a cutting knife or scalpel or X-Acto knife or whatever you want to call it. This is something I already had, so it's not an additional expense I needed to make. A cutting mat to prevent destroying the desk. We have some super glue for sticking. Now I didn't know exactly what type of super glue to get, so I just went on some Amazon reviews that I'd read. And also some Milliput which I'll use on any cracks, crevices, holes that need filling in after 3D printing. So the most exciting part for me is choosing the colours and paints I'll be using. I decided to go for a big old set of 72 colours by Vallejo. They are the Game Colour series. I think each paint holds around 17 millilitres of paint. I used to use these Citadel colours back in the day, but after a little bit more research I decided I'd go with the Vallejos. They seem like the better option. And they all came in this carry case along with a starter set of 3 brushes. Now, I expect there's going to be some paints which I rarely use and others that I use quite a bit, but I thought what I would do is I would get a larger selection to begin with and then work that out, and then I can always replenish the ones I use more often or replace those with a larger bottle. We have some small glass balls which we'll add to the paints to help them mix. So while searching for the right acrylic paints to use, I ended up coming across this set of iridescent Arteza paints. These aren't specifically something you'll need, but I think they will be something that I'll find pretty fun to work with. And while I was on the Arteza website anyway, I was looking at their metallic paints and I thought I would go for a set of those. And I might as well go for a full set of their regular acrylics as well. Even if I don't use them for my models, I'll hopefully be able to use them for other art projects as well. Now, sticking with the Vallejo brand, I've got some white Mecha primer, some black matte primer, gloss black primer, some Vallejo matte varnish. Also, for the last few weeks I've been waiting for an order to arrive for some Vallejo grey primer, some Vallejo gloss varnish, and some Vallejo satin varnish. And if things don't go according to plan and I want to remove any of the acrylic that I put down, I've got some nail polish remover from Tesco's which I'll be using for that. I have some Vallejo liquid mask, which is basically like a type of latex which can be used to mask off certain areas to avoid getting paint on them. One thing I've always wanted to do is learn how to use an airbrush. So I got one quite cheaply on Facebook Marketplace. It was a brand new airbrush, but it was being sold sort of second hand. And I'm hoping I'll be able to use this for laying base colours, priming, getting some cool gradient effects, as well as laying down that final coat of varnish at the end. Like with a lot of the stuff on this list, I've tried to source the cheapest version of that product that I can. Certainly with airbrushes, there's different more expensive models you could get, but for a first time go, this should do adequately. Here's some Vallejo Flow Improver, some Vallejo Thinner to dilute the paint, and also some Vallejo Airbrush Cleaner, which I hope will work a little bit better than the acetone. So after all was said and done, I probably ended up spending around £820 on 3D printing and painting supplies. In one way, it's quite an expensive hobby so far as the initial outlay goes, but a lot of these things are. If you were starting, say, photography or digital art, you'd have to spend probably even more on cameras and computer equipment. So what do you think? Have I got everything I need? Is there anything else I'm missing? Did I go overboard and get bits that, to be honest, I don't really need? Are there better alternatives out there? Let me know your thoughts.